My name is Elena Brooks, and at 31, I was 5 days away from marrying the man I believed was my soulmate, Daniel Harrington. Our story felt like something out of a novel. Serendipitous meetings, late-night talks, shared values, and a love that felt like home. Everything was on track for the perfect wedding in the hills of Santa Barbara. That is, until his affluent family blindsided me with a prenuptial agreement and a chilling ultimatum: sign it, or the wedding is off. What they didn't know, and what they never thought to ask, was that behind my quiet demeanor and modest lifestyle was a $9 million fortune, a flourishing business, and a spine made of steel. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories where underestimated women flip the narrative, hit that like button and subscribe for more true tales of resilience and revenge. I grew up in a cozy suburb outside Seattle. My parents were public defenders, committed, overworked, and endlessly principled. We never had much, but we had enough, and we had each other. They taught me that intelligence, character, and determination were worth more than any name or bank account. I carried those values with me through college at the University of Washington, where I double majored in information systems and applied mathematics, graduating with honors. I got my start working for a fast-growing analytics firm. But within 2 years, I realized I was building empires for other people when I had the tools to build my own. So I walked away and started my own data consultancy focused on helping nonprofits scale using analytics. The risk paid off. By the time I was 29, my company, LinksPoint Solutions, had contracts across the West Coast and a reputation for solving million-dollar problems with elegant code. What very few people knew was that 2 years earlier, I had also inherited $6 million from my late aunt, a brilliant investor who never married and had quietly amassed a small fortune. I invested the bulk of that inheritance into real estate and tech, doubling its value in less than 3 years. My total net worth hovered around $9 million. But if you met me, you'd never guess it. I rented a charming Craftsman bungalow, drove a reliable Toyota Camry, and wore mostly indie brands unless I had to suit up for high-profile meetings. I wasn't hiding who I was. I just didn't believe my worth came from money. I wanted to be loved for my mind, not my portfolio. I met Daniel at a conference on tech and public service. He was speaking on legal frameworks for digital privacy. I was presenting on nonprofit data ethics. We locked eyes over the coffee cart, and the conversation never stopped. His charm wasn't flashy, it was thoughtful. He listened. He asked insightful questions. He cared about equity, which, for a corporate attorney from a legacy law family in San Francisco, was a rare thing. On our first date, he brought used books instead of flowers, titles by Baldwin, Zora Neale Hurston, and bell hooks. We drank overpriced lattes and walked around the marina discussing everything from housing policy to the ethics of AI. I was intrigued, then smitten. We moved slowly, cautiously, but deliberately. He never once brought up his family's wealth, and I never asked. It was a breath of fresh air. Within a year, we were serious. Weekend getaways. Meeting each other's friends. Daniel was the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and the name of your dog-walking neighbor. I loved his steadiness. He said he loved my fire. The first time I met the Harringtons, I understood just how different our upbringings had been. Their family estate in Napa sat on 12 acres of vineyards. The house itself looked like a Tuscan villa, all limestone and glass. I arrived wearing a sleek black dress and flats. His mother, Claudia, wore couture and heels worth more than my monthly rent. His father, Charles, greeted me with a handshake that lingered just long enough to be a message. They weren't rude. They were polite, too polite. The kind of politeness that said, "We're watching you. And we don't like what we see." "So, Elena," Claudia had said, swirling her wine with practiced ease. "Daniel mentioned you run some kind of nonprofit software thing." "I run a data consultancy," I clarified. We work with foundations, NGOs, and educational institutions to optimize their operations using machine learning. How meaningful, she said, eyes flicking to my shoes. Daniel either missed the tone or chose not to address it. I told myself not to overreact. The evening was full of that kind of microaggression. Charles quizzed me about my future earning potential, clearly trying to determine if I was wife material or charity work. Claudia asked about my family background, under the guise of politeness, of course. You're from Kentwood, yes. That's, what, an hour outside Seattle. Small town, I hear. Yes, I said, keeping my tone calm. A tight-knit community. My parents still live there. Lovely, she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Despite their scrutiny, I stayed steady. Because I wasn't marrying them. I was marrying Daniel. Or so I thought. We got engaged 9 months later on a cliff overlooking the coast. The ring was understated, just my style. A vintage Marquise diamond in a minimalist setting. Daniel said it had belonged to his grandmother. It was perfect. Planning the wedding was mostly smooth. Daniel and I agreed on a venue in Big Sur, a sustainable caterer, and a jazz trio for the reception. But cracks began to show, subtle at first. Claudia inserted herself into every decision with veiled critiques. My choices were charming, creative, or unexpected. Never elegant. Never appropriate. I ignored it. I wasn't marrying her. Or so I told myself. 5 days before the wedding, everything changed. I was in the middle of finalizing the welcome bag contents when Daniel texted asking me to stop by his parents' estate that afternoon. He was tied up with meetings, but said his mother wanted to catch up. That should have been my first clue. But I was tired. Stressed. And part of me thought, maybe this was her extending an olive branch. It was a trap. When I arrived, Claudia greeted me in the sitting room. Charles was already there, sipping a tumbler of scotch despite the early hour. The moment I saw the leather folder on the table, my stomach dropped. Elena, Charles said, gesturing for me to sit. We appreciate you making time. There are just a few legal housekeeping items we need to address before the ceremony. Claudia smiled, all teeth. It's really just a formality, dear. Standard for all marriages in our family. What followed was a full-blown ambush. A prenuptial agreement, nearly 30 pages long, detailing what I would be entitled to in the event of divorce. Spoiler, almost nothing. It protected all Harrington family assets, trusts, properties, and future earnings. It made no allowances for my contributions during the marriage. Worse, it included a clause about shared intellectual property that could conceivably give them rights to my company's developments. I stared at the document. This is the first I've heard of a prenup, I said slowly. Daniel hadn't mentioned it. Not once. Charles raised an eyebrow. It's not negotiable. We expect a signed copy by noon tomorrow, or we'll assume the wedding is off. I didn't respond right away. My pulse thundered in my ears, and the silence stretched out until it started to feel like a second layer of attack. Claudia leaned forward slightly, as if encouraging me to be reasonable. I'll need to review this with my attorney, I said, my voice even despite the storm building inside me. There's no time for that, Charles replied, as if he were used to people bending to his schedule. The wedding is in 5 days. We'd like this resolved immediately. And by immediately, Claudia added smoothly, we mean by noon tomorrow. I picked up the document. It felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, psychologically. Like a lead weight designed to keep me in place. I looked down at the stack of legalese, scanned the opening clauses, and quickly saw just how stacked the terms were in their favor. This is highly one-sided, I said carefully. There's no equitable division, no spousal considerations, and this IP clause is, frankly, aggressive. Claudia gave a low, musical laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Surely you understand. The Harrington legacy must be protected. This is how serious families manage risk. And what do you consider me in this situation? I asked, lifting my eyes from the document. A risk? Charles didn't flinch. No offense, Elena, but you're not from our world. You weren't raised with these responsibilities. You may not fully appreciate what it means to preserve a family empire. I wanted to scream. To flip the coffee table and storm out. But I didn't. I've learned that silence, when wielded with precision, can be more unnerving than anger. So I said nothing. I just stood, folded the document neatly in half, and placed it in my bag. I'll review it, I said. With my lawyer. Elena, Claudia began, her voice cool but insistent, we're not trying to upset you. Then you shouldn't have waited until 5 days before my wedding to spring a contract on me that treats me like an opportunist. Claudia blinked, clearly not used to being challenged so directly. Charles narrowed his eyes but said nothing. I'll speak with Daniel, I said, already walking toward the door. That won't be necessary, Claudia called after me. He's aware of the agreement. He's simply not comfortable discussing it. That was the deepest cut. Not the prenup. Not the ultimatum. But the knowledge that Daniel, my Daniel, had known this was coming and let it happen anyway. I didn't respond. I just left. The drive home was a blur of palm trees and coastline. My phone buzzed with messages from Daniel, all variations of call me, where are you, and let's talk. But I couldn't talk to him. Not yet. Not until I got my bearings. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in my car for a full 10 minutes, staring straight ahead, the document still sitting beside me like an uninvited passenger. Then I texted the one person who had always seen the full picture of who I was, Riley. Riley had been my best friend since our undergrad days. A brilliant litigator with an even sharper moral compass, she was one of only 3 people who knew the truth about my inheritance, my company's financials, and how hard I'd worked to build a life on my own terms. I sent her a photo of the prenup with a single line, need to meet. Urgent. She responded instantly, coffee bar at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Bring everything. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced. I worked through the agreement line by line, highlighting every clause that sent up a red flag. The IP clause. The future earnings clause. The clause that essentially barred me from claiming a single dime of shared marital property unless I could prove I contributed at least 51% financially. It wasn't just a prenup. It was a narrative. A carefully crafted story in legal language that positioned me as the lucky outsider, the woman being brought into something great, the one who should be grateful for access and never ask for equality. The next morning, I showed up at the cafe 10 minutes early, laptop and printouts in hand. Riley was already there, reviewing case notes on her tablet and sipping espresso. She took one look at my face and didn't bother with small talk. Show me. I laid everything out, the original prenup, my annotations, and a summary of my assets. As she flipped through the papers, her expression shifted from curious to incredulous to furious. This is an ambush, she said flatly. A legally binding slap in the face. I know. I've seen hedge fund prenups with more balance. And this IP clause. If you develop anything during your marriage, they get rights to it. Even if it's through my existing company. She whistled softly. They're not just protecting assets. They're trying to own your future. I sat back, drained. What are my options? Option 1, sign it. Accept their terms and hope Daniel's love offsets the power imbalance. Option 2, walk. Cancel the wedding, cut your losses, protect your autonomy. And option 3. I asked, though I already had a hunch what she'd say. Option 3, Riley said with a slow smile, is you fight back. You create your own prenup, one that protects your interests equally. And you flip the narrative. Let them realize they're not marrying down. They're negotiating with a peer. The idea hit like lightning. My heart started to pound, not with fear, but with clarity. Of course. I'd spent years making sure my wealth didn't define me. But maybe I'd swung too far in the other direction. Maybe it was time to remind people, myself included, that modesty wasn't the same as weakness. I want option 3, I said. But I want it airtight. Respectful, but ironclad. Riley's grin widened. Girl, I've been waiting for this moment since you bought your second property in Westwood and pretended it was just a fluke. Let's go. We spent the next 3 hours drafting a counter-agreement. Riley worked with surgical precision, reversing exploitative clauses, adding protections for my IP, and ensuring that any shared assets in the marriage would be divided based on a fair and measurable contribution. When we finished, the new document was 12 pages shorter, 3 times as clear, and infinitely more equitable. This is how grown-ups get married, Riley said, tapping the final page. No threats. No ultimatums. Just mutual respect. Before I left, she handed me a manila folder with the printed document and a USB copy. One last thing, she said. Don't just present this to Daniel. Present it with confidence. Let him know this isn't about punishment. It's about partnership. I nodded, steeling myself for what came next. The confrontation wasn't over. It was just beginning. I didn't contact Daniel right away. I needed a moment to breathe, to make sure I wasn't walking into the next phase of this fight out of anger, but with intention. I spent the rest of that morning finalizing the counter-agreement, organizing my financial documents, and rehearsing exactly how I wanted this conversation to go. By the time I texted him, I knew what I needed. No calls. No distractions. Just the two of us, face to face, away from his parents' influence. Can we talk? My place. 6 p.m. No interruptions. He responded within minutes. I'll be there. I'm so sorry, Elena. Please, just let me explain. At 6 sharp, he knocked. I opened the door, and he looked wrecked. Not in the careless way that came from sleeplessness or a bad day. This was something deeper. Guilt. Confusion. Fear. His shirt was wrinkled. His tie, missing. His expression, raw. Elena, he said, the way someone might say the name of a lifeline they thought they'd lost. I stepped aside and let him in. We didn't speak right away. I gestured for him to sit while I placed the manila folder carefully on the coffee table between us. He looked at it like it might explode. I met with your parents yesterday, I began, my voice low but steady. They handed me this. I tapped the folder. And they told me if I didn't sign it by noon today, the wedding was off. He flinched. I didn't know they'd give you a deadline, he said. I swear, I told them I'd handle it. I was going to talk to you myself. But you didn't, I said flatly. You knew this was coming. You let them deliver it like a threat. His shoulders sagged under the weight of the truth. I didn't think they'd go that far, he admitted. They've done prenups for every marriage in the family. My sister. My cousins. It's always handled quietly. And you didn't think I deserved the courtesy of knowing. I was trying to protect you, he said quickly. From them. From this exact confrontation. I thought if I brought it up too early, it would sour everything. It soured everything anyway, I replied. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly unraveling. I love you, he said. I thought we could just sign it, get it out of the way, and move on with our lives. Then you haven't been paying attention to who I am. That landed. He leaned back, eyes finally meeting mine. You're right, he said after a long moment. I didn't handle this well. And the document? I skimmed it last night. It's brutal. Brutal doesn't even begin to cover it. He nodded. So what now? I picked up the folder Riley and I had prepared and slid it toward him. Now, we do this properly. I had my lawyer draft a counter-agreement. One that protects both of us. One that respects what we've each built and what we're planning to build together. He opened it, his brows furrowing as he began to read. I watched his face shift, from worry to surprise to something like relief. This is balanced, he said. There's even a clause for joint earnings and spousal contributions. Because I'm not entering this marriage to take something from you, Daniel. I'm entering to contribute. But I won't do it while signing away my rights or dignity. His eyes paused on the page outlining protections for intellectual property. Your right to guard this, he murmured. Your company, your work, it's incredible. He set the folder down. I don't want to lose you over a document, he said. If this is the agreement you want, I'll sign it. And I'll make sure my parents understand that this is non-negotiable. It's not just about them understanding, I said. It's about them respecting it. He nodded slowly. They won't like it. I know. But I'll stand by you. Then we need to meet with them. Together. Present this as a united front. Daniel exhaled deeply, like a man preparing to face down his oldest fear. Where and when? I booked a private room at the Carrington Club. Neutral territory. Tomorrow. 6 p.m. He nodded, then looked at me. Really looked. Elena. I don't just love you because of who you are now. I love the woman who built herself from nothing, who didn't let money define her, and who has every right to stand toe-to-toe with anyone in my family. That softened something inside me. Not everything. But enough. Then let's do this properly, I said. On equal terms. The next day, I wore my armor in fabric form, a deep emerald suit tailored to precision, paired with subtle gold accents and my aunt's watch. The one she wore the day she signed her first $1 million deal. Daniel looked every bit the high-powered attorney, crisp and composed, but there was a nervous edge to him I'd never seen before. We arrived 10 minutes early. The Carrington Club's private dining room was elegant without being ostentatious. A long mahogany table. Muted lighting. Thick soundproof walls. The kind of place where deals were made and secrets kept. Claudia and Charles arrived precisely at 6:12, late enough to assert dominance, early enough to not be called out for it. Claudia wore a steel blue sheath dress with pearls. Charles, a charcoal suit so tailored it almost looked airbrushed. Elena, Claudia said, her smile tight. You look striking. Thank you, I replied. Please, have a seat. Charles glanced at the folder already waiting on the table. I assume that's not the document we gave you. No, Daniel said before I could respond. It's the one we've agreed upon. The flicker of surprise in Claudia's eyes was quickly masked. Elena has considerable assets of her own, Daniel continued. More than enough to justify a mutual agreement. Claudia's brows lifted. Oh. I opened the folder and placed my financial statements beside it. My company was recently valued at just under $1.5 million, I said evenly. And I hold approximately $7.6 million in diversified investments in real estate, all acquired or inherited prior to this relationship. The silence was immediate. Claudia looked down at the documents, blinking slowly. Charles leaned in, scanning the top-line figures. "I see," he said finally, voice clipped. "This agreement protects both family legacies," Daniel said. "It's balanced, fair, and reflects the reality of what Elena brings into this marriage." Claudia's lips pressed into a fine line. "You've been discreet," she said. "I've been private," I corrected. "Because I wanted a relationship built on love and respect, not on calculations or assumptions." Charles looked between the two of us, then picked up the agreement and flipped through it with a lawyer's eye. "This will need to be reviewed," he said. "Our attorney should." "You had no problem demanding my signature within 24 hours, I said. "You'll have until tomorrow afternoon. Any changes must maintain the core equity and protections." Daniel didn't flinch. "That's non-negotiable." Claudia sat back, clearly trying to recalibrate her image of me. "This changes things," she said finally. "No," I said. "This reveals things." Claudia didn't respond right away. For the first time since I'd met her, she seemed unsure. Not of her footing exactly, but of her assumptions. She sat very still, her fingers gently tracing the rim of her water glass, her expression unreadable. Charles, meanwhile, had shifted fully into attorney mode. He continued flipping through the prenup, occasionally pausing to squint at a line or raise an eyebrow. When he reached the intellectual property clause, he let out a soft breath through his nose, almost a chuckle. "Well played," he said without looking up. "I don't play," I replied calmly. "I build. And I protect what I build." Daniel's hand touched mine under the table. A small, steadying gesture that reminded me we weren't doing this just for show. We were setting the tone for our marriage. And that meant facing down even the most uncomfortable truths, together. When Charles finally set the document down, he looked directly at Daniel. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," Daniel said. "Elena and I are entering this marriage as equals. This agreement reflects that. It's not up for debate." Claudia's gaze drifted from her son to me. Her face had softened, though only slightly. She looked tired. Not in a physical sense, but in the way someone looks when their carefully constructed worldview has just taken a hit and they're trying to find solid ground again. "I suppose I owe you an apology," she said at last. "Not just for the document, but for how I've treated you over the past year." I raised my eyebrows, more surprised than anything else. Claudia Harrington didn't strike me as the apologizing type. "I judged you by surface factors," she continued. "And I'm beginning to realize just how foolish that was." "That can happen," I said gently. "When people hide their light to avoid making others uncomfortable." Her eyes met mine across the table. Something unspoken passed between us, acknowledgement, maybe even understanding. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "This belonged to Daniel's great-grandmother," she said, sliding it across the table. "She was the first woman in our family to run the Harrington Foundation. She inherited the family fortune after her husband's early death and tripled it during the post-war years. Despite the whispers and disapproval from the board, she never backed down. I think she would have liked you." I opened the pouch and found a delicate platinum bracelet inset with tiny emeralds. It was understated, elegant, and clearly old, something worn not for flash, but for significance. "Thank you," I said, touched in a way I hadn't expected to be. "I'll wear it with pride." The mood in the room had shifted. Not warm exactly, but no longer adversarial. Charles nodded once, folding the documents and tucking them into his briefcase. "We'll have our attorney review this, of course," he said. "But assuming no substantive objections, we'll consider this settled. You have until 3 p.m. tomorrow," I said, echoing their own deadline back at them with measured calm. We'd like to move forward with peace of mind. Claudia inclined her head in agreement. Understood. We said our goodbyes shortly after. No one lingered. As Daniel and I walked out of the Carrington Club into the cool evening air, he turned to me and exhaled a long, slow breath. I feel like we just walked out of a war room, he said. Diplomatic victory, I replied. No casualties. He pulled me into his arms right there on the steps, holding me like a man who knew exactly what he almost lost. You are extraordinary, he whispered into my hair. We're extraordinary, I corrected him, pulling back to look into his eyes. Together. 2 days later, we were married in a sunlit garden surrounded by redwoods. The ceremony was intimate, heartfelt, and, despite the earlier drama, full of laughter and joy. Daniel cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. So did I. Our vows were simple, but full of intention. No grand promises, just quiet truths. Partnership. Honesty. Growth. Respect. We meant every word. At the reception, I noticed a distinct shift in the way the Harringtons and their circle treated me. Gone was the polite dismissiveness. In its place was genuine interest, thoughtful conversation, even admiration. Charles introduced me to a venture capital contact as a woman to watch. Claudia seated me beside one of her philanthropic advisors and listened, really listened, when I spoke about my company's upcoming education initiative. Daniel noticed, too. Isn't it amazing, he murmured during our first dance, how a $9 million net worth can change the temperature in a room. It's not the money, I said, resting my head on his shoulder. It's what you demand people see when you stop hiding. He smiled. Either way, I've never been prouder to be your husband. The honeymoon in Costa Rica was everything we needed, hikes through cloud forests, lazy beach mornings, and long talks over coffee that stretched into the afternoon. We planned. We dreamed. We built new rituals. Not to erase the tension of what came before, but to make space for something better. 6 months later, when Claudia suggested a standing Sunday brunch, Daniel responded without hesitation. Once a month, he said. We'll bring dessert. And we reserve the right to skip if we're swamped. I expected pushback. There was none. Maybe she sensed the old tactics wouldn't work anymore. Maybe she realized she respected me more when I set boundaries. Either way, the air between us had changed. Charles, to his credit, made good on his earlier comment. He referred my company to a client at the foundation. When the deal closed, he sent a note that simply said, "Well negotiated." Daniel and I bought a home in Silver Lake, combining our assets, merging our lives in the way that felt right, not based on family legacy or tradition, but mutual choice. The prenup. It sits in a lockbox. Hopefully never needed. But I'm glad we fought for it, not for protection, but for what it represented. Looking back, I'm grateful for the confrontation. It forced conversations we might have otherwise avoided. It made our foundation stronger, not weaker. It made me stop apologizing for my success. I learned that love isn't about folding yourself into a shape that fits someone else's mold. It's about being seen fully, and standing your ground even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Because respect isn't a wedding gift. It's a boundary. One you define. One you protect. Have you ever had to prove your worth to someone who underestimated you? Have you stood your ground and made them rethink everything? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear your story. And if you found something powerful in mine, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories of transformation and quiet strength, and share it with someone who might need a reminder. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to stop shrinking. Thank you for watching. And remember, never let anyone else define your value.